we'll try something a little bit different. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today, I am going to try to go a little bit back more to what the Deep Thoughts have been, where I'm actually going to talk about something in regards to everything that's going on. And it's a bit more, less of the just, I don't kind of know what's going on here, keep motivating you. But which I'm still going to try to do, still want to keep motivating you. And I'm going to be talking about something about wargaming in general, and more specifically, kind of what's going on with Games Workshop, because that's where a lot of my experience is. But while I'm going to be doing that, I'm actually going to be working on some more of the, let's try if we can, to focus on it, focus on my hand, there we go. More of the Blackstone Fortress. I'm going to be painting up the Eldar there. I've actually painted up 4 of the characters so far. So they're coming along here. So we'll block that and then get that focus onto my dude bro there. So that is my rogue trader there. I think he's coming along pretty good. I'm pretty excited with how he turned out there. I've also got the cool robot dude, the Man of Iron, which I'm excited about. He came out pretty well. And then I've got this person, the navigator here. He's pretty cool. I like him. These have been super fun models to paint, and they're really highly detailed, which is really cool. But they're not overly so that it becomes strenuous to paint. There's a lot of blocking, which is really good, and they look awesome. They come out really well. They're easy enough to paint that I don't feel stressed about painting them. But at the same time, there's a lot to them that makes them really interesting. And the way they've been designed, they've been easy to paint so far. I mean, I've still got a lot of models to go on this, so I don't know about all of them if I can say. But the models so far that I've painted have been pretty easy to access with the paintbrush, which is always sometimes a little bit difficult when you have things in the way and you're trying to get behind there. It makes it difficult to keep a clean paint job, and you have to go back and touch things up a lot. But so far, it's been pretty good. I mean, there's been some times, but not a whole lot. So I've been a big fan of these models so far. Doing that, but I'll be painting this guy or this girl, whoever, while I am talking to you guys about the subject that we're going to be talking about today, which is going to be what should our expectations be for a gaming company when it comes to the rules for the game that we invest ourselves into. The big one that always comes up is people talking about armies being OP, armies being ignored, armies being neglected. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. It becomes very difficult to... Everyone wants their army to be the best, you know? I mean, that's the easiest thing, and it's always the way that whatever it is that attracted you to the army, you want that to be the one that you really... that does really well, you know? Because we may not all go into all of our games, like, expecting to win, but at the same time, we don't go into our games expecting to lose. It becomes hard to be motivated to play the game if that's the case. So you want to be able to go into it, and you don't want to end up showing up to a gunfight with a butter knife. You know, it's no fun to just get stomped. And that balance becomes the big issue when companies are making rules for games that they put out. And Games Workshop have been putting out Warhammer 40,000 rules for decades at this point, and those rules have become and gone bigger and more convoluted, or less so, depending upon how they depended upon kind of what they're working with at the time. And they've come out with multiple editions. We're in the 8th edition now of the game of Warhammer 40,000, and all the time those rules are changing. And it always used to be that different armies had better or worse editions that they played in. So for instance, Grey Knights for a long time were felt neglected, but previously they'd been completely super strong. And that kind of that ebb and flow of how armies do, I think, is in large part with the company trying to balance out the armies that they're working with anyway. So you have a lot of these armies that are just a big part of the experience, a big part of what they're doing here, and they try to make it as balanced as possible with their factions, because they don't want to have one army that's just no fun to play because no one's going to buy those models. And at the end of the day, they are a company that is designed to make money. They're a company. That's what a company does. A company isn't out there to lose money. A company isn't out there to do it. That becomes a charity. And Games Workshop isn't a charity. Games Workshop is a company. It's a gaming company. So trying to find that balance within the game itself is a strong way in helping your sales. Because if you have one faction that's just super good and all the others are failures, then you don't have people buying in. You'll just have them buying maybe that one faction, but not really. They're probably not going to get into a game that just feels unbalanced. The whole thing that draws us to Warhammer 40,000 versus being drawn to chess, for instance, is the variety of what you have available to you. Because in chess, you have an absolutely balanced game. You have each side has the exact same models, each side has the exact same rules for their models, and each side has the exact same set parameters of a game board to play on. And it all comes down to your expertise as a player versus their expertise as a player. And Warhammer 40,000, innately, because of the fact that they have different factions that you're playing, is going to be different. The only way that you could have any kind of exact parity with this game is if you had every army had the exact same rules, just with different names. So for instance, you had a Space Marine, and then you have a guardsman whose lasgun has the exact same stats as a bolter. He has the exact same armor save, the exact same toughness, costs the exact same points, but they just have a different model for it. And I think, honestly, that people would get super bored with this, because a part of this game that attracts people is having this variety, so that you can have a horde of orcs versus a small contingent of Space Marines, and have some kind of parity, some kind of balance there, and have them fight it out. Because in the lore, that's the way it works out. But if you wanted to have a fully balanced game, then an orc boy would cost the exact same as a Space Marine with a bolter. And his slugga would have the same rules as the bolter, or a shooter would have the same rules as a bolter. And at the end of the day, you would have balance. You would have, equity, and everyone would be able to buy the models that they think look cool, and they'd be able to play them there. But at the core of it, that's not what Warhammer's about. That's not what Warhammer does. I think that at the core of what draws us to this game is the variety, is the fact that things are different, and you have just this endless green tide of orcs that would be coming at you, because otherwise you'd have the same exact model count essentially as each other. You might change it up with weapons that you give them or anything like that, but you would have these different. You wouldn't have the 200 orc boy list going up against a bunch of Leman Russes in a force. And I think having that kind of innate imbalance in the game is what draws us to it as both a hobby and as a game system in general. But at the same time, you want to have there be a certain kind of balance, so that when you play a 2,000 point game, you want that horde of orcs to have the same chance of winning as that large contingent, that small contingent of Space Marines that cost the exact same points. And at the end of the day, I think it's impossible to find an exact balance between them, because that's just not the way it works. There's always going to be some kind of imbalance depending upon how the game goes and everything like that. Innately you have a lot more dice that are being rolled when you're playing an orc with a horde, and that's going to add in a whole lot more of a question as to what the dice are going to do. You have averages that happen, but averages are based upon the entirety of everything rolling. It's not going to be based upon a small number of dice. So the more dice rolls you have, if you have bad luck with those dice rolls, the more chance for it to fail. But those extra shots are what led you to the balance. Or against the other way, if you have a small number of dice that you're rolling, if they go bad real bad. So if you only have 6 shots and you fail 3 of them, you've missed 50% of your shots. But if you have 12 shots and you miss 3 of them, you've only missed a quarter of the shots. And that's where they try to find you have that same kind of balance issues, even just in that fact that you're working with. So, but what kind of expectation should we have of a company that's putting out a product, putting out a game? What kind of expectations should we have for balance within that game with the armies that we've chosen to play with, the armies that we've chosen to work with? And it's hard. It's a very difficult realm to have it there, because on the one hand, everyone wants their army to be the best, and I think any reasonable person understands that that's just not reasonable expectation to have of them. That whatever you have chosen to be your favorite should be the best. So, for instance, if I want to play Space Marines, and honestly, my favorite way to play Space Marines is just to have a whole bunch of guys with bolters and just have large chunks of dude bros with power armor and bolters just charging across the table, because in my mind, cinematically, it looks amazing, and I love to have it on my shelf, just a ton of dudes in the same power armor up on my shelf. If that's what I want from a Space Marine force, then, but if the way that the rules work, the way the game plays out, the way that different weapons are, that there's a better, formulation for how they work with it, me getting angry because my preferred choice on how to run my force isn't optimal is just in my opinion is not great. If you feel bad, if you feel angry because your preferred choice of tactic doesn't work, that's not on a game company to cater to your preferred choice of tactic. They put out the rules, and then it's up to you to find the tactic that works well within those rules. That's how it always works. That's how it works with literally everything. It's like getting mad at Wizards of the Coast because the art that you like on this one card is the best, and you want to include it in your deck, but it doesn't work for the strategy of that color that you're working with. Then that being angry at Wizards of the Coast for that seems ridiculous, and it's the same thing with being mad at Games Workshop because your preferred tactic isn't the optimal tactic for the faction that you've chosen, or wanting to run it in that same way. So, for instance, if I want to run orcs, but I don't want to paint a whole lot of models, I just like the way orcs look, you're instantly taking away a big thing that works towards what orcs do. They work really well in large numbers and just overrunning the forces. I mean, that works the way it's worked in the lore, and that's the way it's worked in the game for a long, long time. And to go into this and be mad because your very elite orcs don't do as well as a horde of orcs is in my opinion misdirected anger. And there's nothing to stop you from playing it that way, but you just don't go into it expecting to win LVO with it. You can go into your friend's basement with them and have a good fun evening with it. You can go to the game store, pick up some games. I'm sure you could win some games. No one's saying you can't win games. I mean, that's just the way the dice roll, and that's the way, if you are a good tactician, if you can play the game right and you can run with it, I think it can do well, But at the same time, when you start going into this and having these expectations that I think people have for this, you're going to be disappointed. And then when that disappointment turns into anger at the company because what you want to do doesn't work, I think you have a misguided anger at that point. But at the same time, I can totally understand when people feel like their factions are being overlooked. For instance, I have a Deathwatch force, and I know there's a lot of Deathwatch players out there that are pretty disappointed in the rules that we got from the Psychic Awakening, because every other faction so far has gotten some really cool rules. Some, I think, have done better than others, but I think that's innately what you're going to get when you're trying to find this balance and you're trying to create new rules and you're trying to continue and provide new and cool ways to play the armies. There's going to be some winners and losers in all of it, the way it goes. But at the same time, even with that in mind, what the Deathwatch got doesn't seem... it's a shadow of what every other Space Marine chapter got, and every other Space Marine force got. All of the independent chapters, like the Dark Angels and the Blood Angels and the Space Wolves, got some really cool rules, got some really fun things that I think are going to really boost them up well. And at the very least, you would have expected that Deathwatch would have gotten their own doctrine, super doctrine, that they would have gotten their own litanies, and all of these different things that everyone else got, and they didn't. It feels a little bad. It feels a little bad. And with that in mind, where does the line? What expectation should we have of a company? So at the same time, they did bring them up to be basically on par with a bare bones Space Marine. So they do have litanies, they do have doctrines. now, but they don't have anything that makes them special with these new rules. They're basically the bare bones that every other Space Marine got, until the other Space Marines then got more, is essentially what happens. I understand that trying to balance that with the way the Death Watch are a very unique force, are a very unique Space Marine force, and it's hard to really truly balance the Death Watch up against a Space Marine chapter, because even though the chapters are different, like the Dark Angels and the Blood Angels are very different from like Ultramarines and Raven Guard, there's still kind of this sense of them being a chapter of Space Marines, and they've got their own units, they've got their own special things, but at the same time, they're still a chapter of Space Marines. The Death Watch are not a chapter of Space Marines. They're kind of a force of multiple chapters of Space Marines that have come together to work towards one goal of killing Xenos for the Emperor. And when they came out as a force that you could play on the tabletop, they represented that pretty well, in my opinion. I think that the way they've come out with the special issue ammunition, with the tactics that they have, I think they did a really good job of making them play on the table as they are, as what they're meant to be. So a very elite force doing cool and interesting things that others didn't. But now that the Space Marines have changed and they've grown into this new realm of what Space Marines are, it's kind of hard to translate those things exactly to the Death Watch, because a lot of these, it's supposed to be that all these Marines have come from different cultures of being brought up as a Space Marine, from a neophyte to a fully fledged battle brother. And the litanies of battle are meant to be the ideas that have been drilled into their brains by the chaplains from the get-go. And they're, and the super doctrines are meant to be tactics that have been developed by these chapters over millennia of working together. The Death Watch, a lot of these guys have just come on and are starting to work with each other for the first time, or the second time, or whatever number of times it is. They're only together for a finite amount of time. And to try to find something, I mean, it would be easy enough to just say, whatever, on the tabletop it doesn't make a difference. But at the same time, I think Games Workshop tries to balance giving things to armies and balancing it with the lore that they've developed over these decades of work that they've done. So for them to come into this situation, it becomes hard to balance that, where it's like, these guys have not been drilled in with the chaplains of the Death Watch for hundreds of years. These things have not developed over hundreds of years. They're newly found. They're newly formed groups that have to work together. But it does feel though like they're missing out on something as a gameplay mechanic. So what expectations should we have for that? Is that an acceptable thing for Games Workshop to do? That they kind of don't have the same kind of development that everyone else does, but at the same time, should they have to make that kind of development? Is that a reasonable expectation of a company? And I think at the end of the day, the answer is no. The Games Workshop can give us what they're going to give us. I think now more than ever, Games Workshop is listening to the players. They actually have social media out there. They have people that respond to social media. They're even developing more social media presence, with the increase of the Twitter and everything like that. And they're engaging with people. So they're having as much as people complain about all these FAQs that come out, I remember before they were coming out with FAQs that it was like, you got your book and that's it. And they weren't going to talk about it. They weren't going to say anything. And it was all up to you and your opponent to try to figure out how things work. There was no answer. There was no FAQ. There was no definitive statement that said that this is how it's played. And I mean, that's why ITC developed, was to create an FAQ. So as Frontline Gaming decided to create an FAQ for tournament play so that there was at least a statement. So regardless of whether that was the intention of Games Workshop, they weren't going to say anything at the time. So now what you have is a definitive statement, a set of game rules and mechanics that everyone plays by, and now that's what you go with. So for tournament play, for competitive play, that's what you need. And now Games Workshop is providing that themselves. So they're changing things. They're trying to find balance. If things are ridiculously overpowered, you don't have to wait 3 years for a new codex to come out. They'll come out in 2 weeks with an FAQ to change things. or every, what is it, twice a year now they come out with a big FAQ where they change rules and mechanics of the game to try to help balance out what things happen. So when people came up with that mechanic about like with deep striking forces onto the top of a 9-inch building, and now they're 9 inches away, and then they charge with their jump packs, and they have to charge a 0-inch charge because vertical distance doesn't matter. That got changed, and it got changed in a way that took a little finessing and took some different ways of working it out, but they worked it out, and they have something now that I think legitimately works. And some people complain about, it's like, well, why have I turn off my jump pack when I'm jumping? It's like, because it's a gameplay, and that's the whole idea, is that it does require you to have some kind of separation from lore and game. But they try to do a good job of finding that. So now, when they first changed it, it's like I couldn't leap over my own guys in front of me into battle. It's like, well, now you can. You can go over models, but you just can't ignore terrain anymore to take away that one exploit. Where previously, that would never have been. That wouldn't have changed. And that's just the way it would have happened. And that's what you would have been stuck with for another couple of years until they come out with a new game, new rule system, or a new codex. And sometimes you would get a codex and they would change the edition, and you were stuck with those old rules going into this new edition, and you would have to try to make it all work. And you would be waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen. So the fact that they are now being responsive, I think, is the appropriate expectation that we should have. I think if you are a game system pretending like you aren't a game maker, which is what they always said, we're a model company, we're not a game company. I mean, that's a BS cop-out, in my opinion. They were a game company, and they became a game company. And to pretend that you weren't because you didn't want to deal with it is a cop-out. So I think the expectation is that you should have support, especially for a game system like Games Workshop with Warhammer, that they've established a system, and they've agreed to support that system. And they do so in a very responsive manner. But should your what should our expectations be of that? If they are engaging, if they are trying to find this balance, if they are trying to keep some kind of parity, and if they are trying to find ways to fix mistakes or things that were unseen in the game creation, where do you go from there? What do you do? What is our expectation beyond that? Should it be that every army is OP? I don't think so. I think that you're going to have, just because of the way it works out, the fact that everything is different, and that lasguns aren't just a different name for bolter, means that you're going to have some kind of inequality in the way it works out. And it comes down to people trying to find the ways, the matchups that work really well for them, and coming up with a list that work really well. That's why list crafting is almost like a hobby in and of itself. Trying to find the way things work, and trying to find the synergies between rules and units and everything like that. And you come back to, at the end of the day, they try to find a way to find that balance. Should our expectations be, if they fall short in some cases, is our anger about that reasonable? I don't think so. I don't think anger is reasonable. You can be disappointed in wanting something else. The way they changed doctrines now hurt Dark Angels more so than I think most other chapters. Ultramarines didn't really get hurt by it as much as Dark Angels did, and we had the rules for all of like a month before it changed. I know why it changed, and it wasn't because of Dark Angels, but I get it. I understand why it changed, and I understand how it happened. But at the same time, there is a bit of that feel bad that our doctrine was really cool and gave us a really cool edge that we could have worked with to make ourselves, really competitive. And now that changed, and now our super doctrine is over after turn 1, when most of our stuff is a little bit out of range to even with the increased range that it gave, it becomes hard to maneuver yourself into a position where you can use it properly and effectively. Especially on most of the weapons, it's never going to come into effect for pistols. We got 3 extra inches on our pistol range. Whoop-de-doo. We will never be within range for a pistol to shoot, even with that increased range on turn 1. And now it's, that's just the way it is. I think the change needed to be made for the way a lot of the other armies worked, like Iron Hands in particular. I think that the changes they made to Iron Hands were good, and I think they helped to balance it. And I think now Iron Hands are still a good army, but they're just not broken army. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that if you have a force out there that is either completely broken, so that it's just always going to be at the top of the heap no matter what, or if you have an army out there that's just completely busted, and it will always be at the bottom no matter what, that you have a problem. Trying to find that balance to bring them into everything. There will be some that kind of rise to the top more often than others, and I think that's just the reality of a game system that's not completely balanced, like chess. But I think what they gun for is that everything kind of like floats in the middle, so that it doesn't just get awful. Everything is not just awful, and everything is just not super good. I don't think Games Workshop wants to see an all Space Marine tournament. I don't think Games Workshop wants to see no Harlequins or no Death Watch on the table. They want to see everyone going out with all of the lines that they've put a lot of hard work into. So even though the rules update was not great, they still put a lot of work into putting out their codex, coming up with the rules and game mechanics that they did come up with, putting out and designing and building all of those models that they have for it. A lot of work from that company went into making these lines that they want to see them out there. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation for a company to want to see their product out there and appreciated by the people. So I don't think they look to just to nerf armies because they just don't want to see them out there. I think they do want to see them out there. I think they try to find a balance. They try to find that. And I don't, they're not a huge company. I know they make a lot of money, but they're as a company in and of itself, they don't have a lot of people that are working on these things. The rules team is not huge. Their modeling teams are not huge. They do a lot of work with what they have, and they put out a lot of product for what they have. And at the end of the day, you're not going to know how all of these rules are going to interact with all of the other rules that you've had out there until you put it out there for people to play. They've been doing a lot more play testing than they have previously. I know a lot of the guys at the Frontline Gaming and stuff like that have been involved with the play testing of the rules that have been coming out and of the mechanics that have been coming out and the models that have been coming out. And I think a lot of what they've been doing with that play testing really drives a lot of the early FAQs that come out. So that's why they're able to kind of find those things, because the production timeline that they have to work on doesn't allow them to really. It would push things back too far at this point to be able to utilize it in an entirely different way. I know that they can make some changes, but sometimes they can't. And the fact is that they're doing more now than they ever have before, despite people's grumblings about it. And yeah, there was always going to be mistakes. I mean, there's always going to be mistakes. I mean, if typos or errors in writing are there in literally everything that I read. There are books that I read that are not Black Library that have those typos, that have mistakes in them. Same thing goes even for textbooks and stuff like that. There's only so much that you can try to do that mistakes are gonna go through, especially the amount that they pump out. They pump out a lot of stuff, a lot of new rules, complex stuff that gets pumped out at a huge rate. You may not buy all of them because you may not have those armies, but they pump out a lot of stuff. I've been getting books about every couple weeks now, and each of them has a whole new system of rules, whole new system of lore, whole new system of gameplay in them, and to expect them to be able to pump all of that out without any mistakes being in there is unreasonable, in my opinion. And you're right, you did pay for these models, but I don't think paying for those models comes with an ability to demand that they cater to you specifically. I think that the expectations that we should have is that they will support the system that we play, that they will keep doing, they will keep trying to put it out, and that only happens if the company remains solvent, the company remains profitable. And if you want to have that to keep happening, then you need to support them. So the best way to make sure that your rules get updated, the best way to make sure that your rules keep going, is to actually buy GW product. Is to actually buy the models, even if you think they're too expensive. I mean, if you don't buy them, they're not going to be there. They're not going to have them. They're not going to have rules to support them. So, maybe the fact that there are so many non-Chaplain Dreadnoughts out there might be why they don't have the model anymore. If people were demanding it, if people wanted or kept buying it, they would be out there. And I think that that's kind of the reality that it comes down to. If you want to see rules updated, if you want to have a chance at your stuff to do it, You need to support the company to keep going. Otherwise, they fold and they aren't able to put it out. And to expect that your fellow gamers are the ones that support it for you is, I mean, that's super selfish in my opinion. I think that, because expecting other gamers to buy their product because they will, but meaning that you don't have to because someone else will, that's selfish. And I think that's self-centered in a way that is super detrimental to the hobby, in my opinion. I understand not having enough money to buy everything that you want. I mean, I'm always in that situation. I mean, I'd love to have 1,000 of every single army and every single unit, but I make do with what I can. And I'm in a place where I have the ability to do probably, more than some, but less than others. And that's the reality that I think everyone falls into, somewhere on that spectrum, from being able to own every unit in multiples down to just getting by with one kill team, and I think you fall somewhere in that spectrum, and to be mad because you can't be above that is I mean, it doesn't help. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody. But to then go out and demand that I be able to make my own models, I mean, it doesn't support them at all at that point. If you go out and you download the rules for free, if you go out and you get the models from a third party, a third party recaster, at that point you're not supporting the game at all. And what you're doing is you're just putting a burden on everyone else to support it. And your expectations at that point are a little bit unreasonable. I really do think so. Yeah, I think that our expectations for this game should be that they are supported. I think they should try to find parity as much as possible, and I think generally they do. I think sometimes it falls a little bit more shorter than others, and I think you're always going to have different factions performing better than others based upon the rules that are out at the time. I mean, that's the way it's always been with 40K, and I think that's the way it's always going to be. I think you have more parity now than you've ever had before because of their attempts at finding parity, whereas previously they just threw whatever they wanted out there and you were stuck with whatever it was. Now they're trying to find it, so they try to balance the points. They try to balance the powers. They try to clarify the rules. They try to change mechanics so that things are a little bit more balanced. And that balancing creates for honestly, a more enjoyable gaming experience when you're playing. By the end of 7th edition, I was just mad. I was just mad at the game. I didn't want to play it. It was, especially going to tournaments, it was just, it was boring. And it was enervating. And it was just like, I would leave tournaments just like in a bad mood, in a real bad mood. And not because I lost. It was just because of the experience of trying to play that system at the end of the day. It just was so many different rules that were just not conducive to the game flowing properly. And on top of that, there was no attempt by the company to try to balance it out and try to find parity within their own system. Now in 8th edition, yeah, there have been times when you sit back and you're like, there's nothing I could do against that Iron Hands list. There were some Iron Hands lists that you just couldn't do anything about it. I've run into now with the Paladin bomb for Grey Knights. I'm like, I don't know what to do about this. And they've happened, but then they've stepped up and made changes to the game and changes to those mechanics to help alleviate some of those problems. So some of the biggest problems that we had at the beginning of 8th edition are now no longer a problem. So you no longer see 5 Storm Ravens and Gilliman because they're like, all right, well now that's no longer an issue anymore because they changed the rules to make that kind of list not work anymore. They've cut down on the spam lists that have gone out because of the rule of 3. And I know there's still ways that people find to try to do as much of that as possible, but you're not seeing those same kind of skew lists as much anymore because it doesn't work in the game that they've developed. Because the beginning of 8th edition, skew list was the way to go. Skew list was the way that you got wins. And because of their responsiveness, because of listening to the community and wanting to find some kind of parity, it doesn't work anymore. It's like I'm sure it would work if you were able to, but you can't do it anymore. And that finding that balance, finding those changes, have created a system that is much more palatable and more fun and enjoyable to play. So I think that's where the expectation should lie. And I think that for the for the most part, I think GW has responded appropriately and has responded in a way and provided a product that we can enjoy and that is responsive and that is following along with what our expectations, I believe, ought to be. You know, yeah, there will always be things, like I said, like the Death Watch rules rub me a little bit the wrong way. But at the end of the day, do I think that I should be able to demand other rules from them? No, I don't think that I'm going to be signing any change.org, petitions to make them do something different. I think that at the end of the day, I'm going to play the models that I want to play and find ways to play them in ways that is enjoyable for me. I think it comes back to that expectation of what your expectations should be. So if I want to play Death Watch because I think Death Watch are cool, I like the models, I like the lore, I like all about it, I can still play them and I can still have fun and I can still have an entertaining game with them. But I'm probably not going to go to LVO with them because my expectation for it is that in a competitive situation, they're probably not going to be able to hold up as well as some other Space Marine forces. But I can certainly talk to my friends and put a game against Tyranids or put a game against literally anyone else if you have the expectations and have an understanding and the communication with your opponent about what you're looking for and what you think is going to happen with the game. And you will still have a competitive game in and of itself and have a close game and have a fun game. I don't think that these rules make it unfun to play them. It may be unfun to take them to a big tournament, a very competitive tournament necessarily sometimes. But then again, I don't think that Games Workshop make rules for LVO. I think LVO and the big tournament scenes are a big chance for them to see play testing, because a lot of what they look for when people are trying to make these big competitive tournament lists are they try to find the synergies and they try to find the rules tweaks that give them that edge. And I think that sometimes when those edges become a little bit too harsh, that's when GW goes in and sands them down. And now it's still about finding those edges, but I don't think the edges are quite as sharp and painful for your opponent anymore. And that's when I think you have a system that is effective. And I think you have a system that works well. So the list that I'm going to be bringing to a big tournament is going to be very different than a list that I might bring to my friends to the game store once you get back at this to be able to play. And understanding that, I think, is going to go a long way in understanding what our expectations should be. So I don't think that our expectations should be that whatever army I want to play and whatever list I want to bring should be able to win LVO. I just don't think that's a reasonable expectation to have about the game. My expectation might be that I would want it to be supported. So if you put it out there as an option, I would hope to see it supported. I would hope to see it continued, and I would hope to see it playable in the game. So if they just decided to not make an Eldar Codex because they just didn't want to, I think at that point you're kind of you're having an issue with what you're doing. If you put them out there as an army to play and then you just have no support for them, maybe that's what your expectation should be. As long as you're supporting it, as long as you're pushing forward and it's working, then yes, But then again, at the end of the day, I guess if Eldar just weren't selling anything and no one wanted to play it and you were the only person that thought that Space Elves were cool, then I can understand them not continuing the line and not continuing the support for it. So, it's a hard line to figure it out, because at the end of the day, it is a company. And if they're not making money, then they no longer exist. And they're not just are there people that are out of a job then, but then there's also, it's just they don't exist as an entity at that point, and they're not a charity. They're not out here to give you things. They're out here to make money, because that's what they are. That's what they do. It's like anything else, The NFL doesn't have football games for fun. The NFL has football games to make money, So if a player hurts themselves, they're probably out of a job. They might support them to try to make sure that they're healthy, but they're not going to continue their contract. They're not going to continue paying them money if they hurt themselves, even if they hurt themselves out on the field. they're only gonna support them as much as they're gonna be able to make money off of them. And I think that's the same way that it works here with Games Workshop stuff. That if models or systems or armies don't make money, then they're not going to be supported because they're not doing what they are designed to do, which is make money. So I think our expectations, reasonable expectations for a game system, should be an attempt at parity, an attempt at balance, responsiveness, and and support for a thing that's profitable. And I think 40K is profitable right now, and they should continue to support it, which they do. And they're being responsive. They have their community team out there listening to things. They have them putting out FAQs, and they have them putting out all sorts of different things that I think are making this game the most enjoyable it's been since I've been playing it. So at the end of the day, make sure that your expectations are tempered with reality, so that, if your expectation is that my army with my strategy isn't winning, therefore they're a garbage company and I demand a refund, I think at that point you've lost the hook. But if your expectations are that I'm able to choose the army that I want to and find a way to be able to play this game against other people, then your expectation, I think, is hitting along more of what is based more upon reality at that point. So hopefully we can all get back to be able to play and find that parity and find those changes that need to be made soon enough. So I did 0 thin coats today. I had my wet palette and everything ready to go, and I just completely dropped the ball when it came to painting. So whatever, it is what it is. But I'd like to hear what you guys have to say down there. I'm sure you have many thoughts on the topic. That's why I decided to do something like this. It's a bit different than what I've been doing relatively recently, but I felt like shaking it up a bit, trying to change the topic and just talk back about what we used to be talking about. That's what we used to talk about all the time before everything before the defecation hit the ventilation. So I think being able to get back at this and talk about these things as a community might be helpful. I don't think it's the only thing we're going to focus on, and I can't say that I'm going to be talking about similar topics necessarily next week. I might get back to just trying to survive again, which I think is a completely reasonable and okay thing to be doing right now. So, but I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. And until next time, have fun.